Wonderful. Welcome everyone to our first session of the day. This is the first of our best practices sessions where we are turning to scholars from both of the two countries to share with us their experiences carrying out collaborations of all different sorts. The first focus here today, as you see on the slide, is on the subject of joint doctoral training, and the specific case study here is the International Research Training Group Diversity, and we're pleased to have two of the spokespersons from this project with us here today. We have, first of all, Professor Dr. Ursula Lehmkuhl. She is the Chair of International History at the Université Trier, and Professor Laurent McFalls, a Professor of Political Science at the Université de Montréal. These two institutions, together with Saarland University, have come together to offer this project, so we're very keen to hear from them about their experiences with it. They've been at it for a bit of time now, so they have some experience to look back on as well. And I will take this opportunity to point out that the session which follows this is from our colleagues at the German Research Foundation, the DFG. They are one of the sponsoring partners, funders of this project. So it will be a great opportunity for those of you interested in the specific program to ask questions about it. But at this point, I would like to pass the baton over to Professor Lehmkuhl, if I might.
Sure.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kleiner, Paul, for this very kind introduction. I don't see my colleague, Laurent. Laurent, are you there? So I just need to check. Is he among us?
Absolutely.
Because
he is here. He needs to come in from the green room.
Okay, we have organized this presentation like in a dialogic way, and we will have I'm not speaking
here
alone, but we do it. Here we go. Okay.
Here we go.
Great. So now I can see
Excellent. Great.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be able to present our joint doctoral training program. The one, I think the first and so far only one Canadian-German one in the humanities and social sciences, a research program that is entitled Diversity Mediating Difference in Transcultural Spaces. So you see me, Paul already introduced me. My background is international history with a specialization in North American history, colonial history, migration history, and environmental history, as well as the history of international relations. And Laurent is going to introduce himself as well. Oh, we can't hear you. You have to switch on your microphone.
Okay, I had it on.
Here we go.
I'm Laurent McFalls, and I'm Professor. Hear me now? I'm Professor of Political Science at Université de Montréal, where I've been for the last 30 years. And for much of that time, I've been one of the co-founders and for a long time director of our Center for German and European Studies, a DAAD initiative. And it's within that framework that this whole project got started, but we'll tell you that in our presentation.
Yeah. So here we go. So this is we. That means the team of spokespersons. We are collaborating from three places: the University of Trier, Université des Saarlandes, and Université de Montréal. And beside Laurent and myself, we had during the first funding period Hans-Jürgen Lüsebreg from the Universität des Saarlandes and now Astrid Fellner as co-spokespersons representing this third institution. This is our research team. It's a picture that we put together, I think, 2 years ago. So the faces have changed a bit, but you see we are a large group, a large German-Canadian group of faculty members and doctoral students. We are a group that practices transnational interdisciplinarity, and we bring together expertise from many different disciplines, ranging from history to philosophy and political science. Interdisciplinarity also characterizes our supervision and mentoring program. So all doctoral students are embedded in interdisciplinary supervision and mentoring committees, and even the doctoral tandems that we have established within and between the three cohorts of doctoral students have resulted in many cases in interdisciplinary teams. Laurent will now continue to explain you where we have come from.
Yes, just before I say that, let me just explain very quickly. It's a 9-year program overall, which has 3 cohorts of 20 doctoral students, 10 on each side of the Atlantic. So it's a puzzle with many moving parts, and sometimes it might be hard to follow. But let's go back to the origins of all this. I mentioned before that thanks to generous funding from the DAAD, we have a Center for German and European Studies at Université de Montréal, which among its mandates is to develop the not only transatlantic collaboration, but to train the next generation of scholars with transatlantic experience. And the IRTG diversity has been sort of our main thrust over the last 10 years as we've developed it and started it to fulfill that mandate. Early on in the existence of the center, we were lucky enough that from the Canadian side, Hans-Jürgen Lusebrink from Saarland University received the Diefenbaker Fellowship, which allowed him to spend quite a bit of time at the center for 2 years, leading to numerous collaborations, including a conference that we did in 2003, Beyond Area Studies. And the idea was to break up a little bit the vessel, the or not ethno-nationalism, but I should say rather the methodological nationalism that tended to characterize international studies, and to look at different scales, different ways of looking at the world beyond putting into little blocks of areas. Around the same time, in 2004, a professor from Université de Montréal, Bruno Ramirez, who's part of our team, went to Trier to teach at the Center for Canadian Studies. And it's been very important that both Trier and Saarland University have concentrations in Quebec and Canadian studies, which meant there's been between those two universities an important critical mass of scholars looking from that side of the Atlantic onto Canada, while of course our center includes people looking the other direction. In 2007, that was the first time I met Ursula Lehmkuhl, and we discovered many common interests from Max Weber to Michel Foucault and governmentality. And since that time, both Weber and Foucault have animated our reflections on diversity, opening it up to a broader theoretical perspective. And that has carried through in much of our research up to the present. It took us several years to leverage back and forth between funding opportunities between Germany and Canada. The DFG program for Internationale Graduiertenkolleg, the International Research Training Groups, as they are called in Neudeutsch, was a possibility. However, on the Canadian side, it took quite a bit of work to convince SSHRC to introduce this kind of doctoral training program into its funding lines. And we managed that, and after an initial partnership development grant from SSHRC, which convinced the German side that Canada was ready to put money on the table, the DFG in turn funded us with the Graduiertenkolleg program, and that convinced then SSHRC that yes, we were on our way, and so we then got another grant from SSHRC. And the upshot of all of this is that our program has been funded since 2013. And as I said before, it's a 9-year program. So we're entering the final stretch now with a little bit of extension because of the pandemic. So this has been a marvelous adventure over the years. It's a quarter century of history of transatlantic collaboration, which it takes that amount of time to develop this kind of program, to find the partners who are motivated, sincere, ready to put in the work for this kind of collaboration. And you don't do it overnight, so that's really the fundamental point of this slide. I think I've covered everything. This has also led us, in a certain sense, to gain international recognition. As Ursula mentioned, we are the first Canadian-German Graduiertenkolleg research training group in the social sciences and humanities, and this has made it possible for us to defend this kind of project with SSHRC. We've participated in several SSHRC events about research strategy. The Transatlantic Platform, an important meeting in London about 5 years ago now, that was looking to the IRTG as a potential model. Events at the DFG, at the DAAD, at the von Humboldt Stiftung. These have all been places where we've been active in promoting this kind of transatlantic collaboration for doctoral training. And well, we'll get into the details now of how it's worked out. It's been generally
maybe I should add that our SSHRC grant application, when we try to find a similar program that would match the DFG International Research Training Group funding line, this didn't exist before. So I really went to Ottawa. I spoke to the vice presidents of SSHRC, and our initiative also led to innovation in the SSHRC funding line partnership programs, in the sense that they included the line of talent and the support of doctoral and student research training in this very complex and broad funding scheme of partnership programs. Well, our research program, we would like to say a few words about our research program. We're, I think, very proud to say that our research program on diversity is quite unique because it stresses the historicity and the social constructedness of cultural pluralism. We analyze the dynamic processes that engender diversity and are engendered by it, and we are interested in paradigmatic changes and historical transformations in interpreting multicultural realities in North America and Europe. We understand diversity to be the outcome of a continuous process of mediation and translation, whereby power relations and mode of social action construct potential differences into socially effective markers. And we are also interested in the processes generating diversity, and we think that these processes are shaped by specific socially, culturally, and politically constructed physical and symbolic spaces that change over time. You see here we have a lot of process, change, etc. So all categories that are geared toward capturing the historicity and the social constructedness of diversity. Our research program is organized in 3 research areas: politics, practices, and narratives of diversity. Each of them reflects specific modes of social action that serve as an analytical tool to structure our collaborative research efforts that explore how European and North American societies have problematized, constructed, and experienced social, cultural, ethnic, and religious difference. So the research framework is now explained by Laurent.
Yes, as Ursula has stressed, unlike many approaches to diversity, it's obviously a topic that's been on the agenda for 10 to 20 years now, and is certainly an issue of social importance. Many of these looks at diversity from other research groups and training groups see it in more essentialist, identitarian categories, and we've tried to loosen that up, break it up, with a theoretical approach that, as Ursula just stressed, historicizes the phenomenon of diversity, de-essentializes it, recognizes it as a social construct. And in doing so, we draw on 3 main theoretical and methodological approaches. The first is jeu d'échelle. That is the idea that both time and space are differently scaled, and as we move from the micro to the meso to the macro, or from the longue durée back down to the événementiel, that the appearance of diversity changes with the scale that we're looking at. This also draws on the fact that we are a transatlantic group, that we're looking back and forth across the Atlantic. So one of the spaces is this North Atlantic region, Europe and North America since the Enlightenment. But within this jeu d'échelle, we practice what we call the herméneutique croisée. The idea here is to go beyond histoire croisée to really make productive the frictions between our interdisciplinary perspectives and our cross-cutting looks across the Atlantic. So we have Canadian scholars looking at Germany and Europe. We have German scholars looking at Quebec, at Canada, at North America more broadly. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye, and that's the whole point, is for us to enter into dialogue, into debate. Sometimes it can be quite heated, but the idea is that by shifting back and forth from our perspectives, that there is an added value of hermeneutic inquiry, of possibilities to interpret and reinterpret. To say this much more banally, I know that when I, as a North American, come to Germany and pronounce about what I see going on there, in the first instance, German scholars either find it quaint or find it irrelevant or irreverent. But in the end, it ends up leading to productive dialogue. And of course, the same goes in the other direction. Now, often things are lost in translation. So our third important concept is the notion of translation, not just understood in the sense of linguistic translation from text to text, but more broadly, when we understand social reality to be a form of textuality, a translation becomes a concept where things shift in meaning, generate new meanings. And so we've mobilized this concept of translation from not only a literary concept to one that is more broadly social theoretical. And so we've put into practice these three methods, translation, jeu d'échelle, herméneutique croisée. And as I said before, we have many moving parts, and these moving parts also are part of our theoretical approach.
Yeah, beside this research program, we have a qualification program that is geared to really bringing these two cohorts, or the two groups, the Canadian and the German group of faculty members and doctoral students together to create a German-Canadian network of researchers focusing on the topic of diversity. And this is an overview over the qualification program that we have established. As you can see, with the green elements in there, we have inbuilt mobility phases so that the German and the Canadian students can each move to Germany, Europe, that is for the Canadian ones, or vice versa to Quebec, Canada, the German ones who research the system over there, to do their archival research, their library research, their field research in the respective other world region. In addition to this, we have, and these are the bubbles, we have 5 events where we come together as a group and meet together and work together in intensive seminars. We start with, during the first year of a cohort, already after 4 months with our summer school. Then like about half a year later, we have a spring school. Then we have a midterm international conference where we meet in Canada, in Montreal. And that then, leads to the pre-dissertation workshop and the final dissertation workshop. and the rest, meaning the rest 6 months of the 3-year funding period of each doctoral researcher, is left for really finishing the manuscript and working on the results of their research. In addition, and that is something that you know that everybody has to include, we have workshops, research seminars, we have elements of key skills that are included. We have a regular workshop on career development, on academic writing. The students participate in disciplinary research colloquia, and that is an element where we bridge between our interdisciplinary program and the disciplines, which we all find that it's very important, because all of our students are doing their PhD or Dr. Phil in a specific discipline. So they have to submit and defend their dissertations in their specific disciplines. They do not end up with a PhD in diversity studies, because we think that doing this kind of, not disciplinary PhD is not really supported for an academic career or for whatever they like to do after they finish the program. So the concept of discipline-based interdisciplinarity, on which we have structured our qualification program, is very dear to us and is very important for the way we collaborate also with the disciplines involved. So that is our qualification program. The international experience leads to an exchange. So we have a circulation of knowledge, and that's why we have this little graph here. The bubbles symbolize the research stays of our researchers, of our doctoral researchers abroad. You see that they are not only focusing on Trier or the greater region, but that, for example, the Canadian ones also do research in the United Kingdom, in France, in Italy, in Switzerland, in Austria, and in other places. The same holds true for our doctoral researchers. They not only focus on Montreal and Quebec, but we have historians among us who worked a lot in Manitoba on Métis history, and who also established contact to the west coast of Canada, especially the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So the circulation of knowledge, the exchange, again, is a fundamental element of our concept of hermeneutique croisée. And the international experience that you see here is what we call hermeneutique croisée in practice. To really visit this other country, to live there for an extended period of time, to see how this country works on an everyday basis. And that is at least as important as having, the research knowledge about the history or literary field or ethnological field of the other country. In addition, we do things of internationalization at home. That is reflected in our visiting researcher program. And these are only a few of the visiting researchers that came to Trier. And I'm showing you the Trier and Saarbrücken situation because, and that is something that Laurent is going to explain in the end, we have differences in the funding opportunities. This kind of visiting researcher program is not part of the SSHRC funding, and that is why this is very specific for the German side, where we have the opportunity to invite international guests to have this experience of internationalization at home. This is another thing that is Laurent's. Yeah.
We do, thanks to the DAAD, who's hosting us today. Thank you, John Paul. Thanks to the DAAD, we do have a visiting scholar program funded for the Center for German and European Studies, which has allowed us to bring in people for longer stays. And as I mentioned, it was the original Diefenbaker program that really got the ball rolling with Hans-Jürgen Lusebrink's stay. But without that day funding that lets us bring people in for a month or two, we wouldn't be able to mirror this internationalization at home in the way they have it funded by the DFG on the German side. So you might think with all of these activities that we've described, mobility phases, workshops, involvement in faculty research that's also incorporated into the program, you might think this was a big distraction for our doctoral students. And we've made every effort to make sure that it is not a distraction, but rather a reinforcement of their doctoral training, that the interdisciplinarity doesn't send them down rabbit holes, but rather enriches their program. And the result has been quite pleasing, because in the end, in theory, everybody's supposed to be finished in 36 months. We'll get to that a little bit later. In practice, we know that on average, in Germany, it's 56 months before completing a dissertation. In Canada, after the qualifying exam, it's largely the same. It takes about 4 years after the qualifying exam on average for people to finish. We can report in our cohorts up till now a time to completion of 39 months on the German side and 38 months on the Canadian side, which I think we can say is mission accomplished, because the point of this research training group is to help the doctoral students complete their dissertations in a timely manner while enriching them with this interdisciplinary training and international experience. So this has been a very positive element. Another positive element, I guess we've had to hide some faces here.
We did this because maybe I can explain that. We did this because it's going to be published, and you know that we have to do it to save pictures of children. Sorry.
Right. Okay. So, but behind every one of those gray bubbles, there is a child, and the program is designed in such a way that students who already have children are able to get child support to help them write their dissertation while having a family. And several students have used this occasion, thanks to the opportunities and support from the program, to have children during their doctoral dissertation. So this has been an unexpected but very pleasant side benefit of the program. So we've become really quite literally one big family. Oh yes, okay, and it's still my turn. So as I mentioned, completion 36 to 38 months, so well below the average time in Germany and Canada. We can also report that 88% of our doctoral students have completed or will complete their doctorate. Now you can never say will, because anything could happen, but by the end of the program, 50 of the 57 students who enrolled will have completed a dissertation. At the same time, the program has produced 11, or will have finished producing 11 collective volumes in our series with Waxman, a trilingual series, which is important for providing an outlet, a multilingual outlet. The program has also supported numerous monographs, including not just published dissertations, but new works published by our faculty members with support from the IRTG. And we can't even begin to count the numerous articles and conference presentations. We are still working on, well, we're actually already working on our final report for the DFG and for SCHIRC, and we are expecting some very large numbers in those categories as well before it's all over. So it has been a productive undertaking.
Yeah, the last two slides will focus on some challenges that we see and some recommendations. And this is something we do together. So we see 8 challenges that we'd like to share with you. The first challenge refers to funding and financial support. There is so far no agreement between SCHIRC and DFG in the humanities and social sciences to organize something like a lead agency process or a collaborative process in with regard to the project application, which meant that what we needed to do is we needed to go through two original and not very congruent application processes with SCHIRC and with the DFG, which meant two project applications to be written, two interviews to be held, and then again, you know, struggling a bit with the differences with regard to how funds are provided, what you can finance out of the funds, and also creating, let's say, a sort of imbalance between the German and the Canadian doctoral students. The German doctoral students all have a what we call a position at the university with which they have social security and all kinds of other things attached, whereas the Canadian doctoral researchers are working on a stipend, a scholarship sort of thing. Lawrence, would you like to add something with regard to this point? Or
yes, both quantitatively and qualitatively, the funding works quite differently. Quantitatively, the German side is much more generous. There's a lot more money coming from the DFG than there is from SCHIRC. Now, on the other hand, it's because of differences also in the funding of doctoral students on both sides of the Atlantic. So as Ursula mentioned, on the German side, they become employees of the university. They have a work status with everything that goes with it. Whereas on our side, the students, the funding from SCHIRC is seen more as a supplement to existing integrated funding programs for the doctoral students, which includes other scholarships and stipends, but also teaching responsibilities, research positions as research assistants. So in the end, they come up, in fact, the funding becomes equivalent, but through different channels. So this means at times we need to explain to the doctoral students on both sides that they're working in two different systems with two different ways of funding their work. So they can't always have everything be the same, which isn't always immediately obvious. And so that's one of the challenges that we've had to face, is explaining again and again why one thing is possible in Germany, another thing is possible in Canada, and not vice versa. We can go into the details later if you like, but there is still a lot of harmonization that needs to be done in order for us to have a fully coherent program, and also have a more solidarity, because students, when they don't share exactly the same material conditions of work, are torn apart a bit by that difference.
Yeah. The third point is the qualification of doctoral researchers. We have advertised the positions and the scholarships on both sides of the Atlantic, and what we have seen in the application and the interviews, the selection process, is that more and more the master students who apply for these kind of jobs or for these employment positions or for becoming a member in the International Research Training Group situation, they lack a solid disciplinary grounding. And that has to do with increasing numbers of interdisciplinary MA programs, where they learn a lot from, learn a little, like say from history, from political science, a bit of ethnology, maybe a bit of economics and whatever. And in the end, they, in our system or in our program, they have to defend and to write the dissertation in a specific discipline. And this lack of a solid disciplinary grounding is really something that we face as one challenge in the supervision of our doctoral researchers. And that's something we'd like to point out here, as well as differences in the doctoral program structures between Canada and Germany, and that's something that Lawrence likes to explain.
Yes, an important difference in structure across the Atlantic is that on our side, we can't admit students into the program. I mean, they don't. It's not quite that way in Germany either. They do go through departments, but we can recruit only students who have already been admitted to a doctoral program, and ideally who have completed their qualifying exam. So it leads a little bit to a different situation than in Germany, where our students might be a little bit too anchored in their disciplinary training. Yet the things that Ursula was pointing out, that even where we do have a strong disciplinary anchoring, there's a danger that interdisciplinarity can come along and undermine people's solid grounding in their own discipline. So this is something sort of transcends the scale of the IRTG, but this is something to keep an eye on, especially since a lot of these funding programs really do trumpet interdisciplinarity, and you have to look out for what you wish for sometimes.
Yeah.
We can come back to that later, I'm sure, in discussion.
Yeah. The fourth point is that we have seen and encountered certain institutional resistances. For example, when it comes to the question of co-tutelle. That again has to do with very specific rules and regulations concerning how to set up a dissertation committee, who might be included, who might not be included, who is going to finance a co-tutelle, which encompasses bringing, faculty members from abroad to regular meetings, to the defense of the dissertation. And at least in our case, I think in Saarbrücken it's a bit different because they are very closely attached to the Deutsch-Französische Hochschule, and they do a lot of co-tutelle. But at my place in Trier, usually if you want to do a co-tutelle, you have to go through the faculty meeting, the faculty Rat, Fakultätsrat, Fachbereichsrat, and it has to be done on an individual basis. You have to prove how you're going to finance it, etc. pp. So there is this kind of inbuilt institutional resistance that one has to take into account when it comes to formalizing the supervision and also the membership of, for example, Canadian faculty members who are part of the mentoring team in a doctoral supervision committee or a Promotionskomitee, Ausschuss on the German side. There are other institutional resistances that we have encountered in Canada, and that's something Laurent is going to talk about.
Yes, just to echo the whole difficulty with co-tutelle. In fact, we very quickly decided that we would not try to create a co-tutelle program because given the number of disciplines involved in the three institutions, it was just going to be a nightmare. So we tried to make up for that with transatlantic supervision teams, but again, there's certain resistances on the Canadian side. For example, we don't get recognized for the role we play in supervising students in Germany because there isn't a co-tutelle arrangement. So it can have a certain disincentive to investing a lot if there's not recognition from the host university, from the original university, for this activity with the other university. At the same time, it's impossible for our German colleagues to be formally recognized as co-supervisors on our side. So there's a lot more institutional work that needs to be done to get these kinds of arrangements to work more harmoniously. And on top of that then comes our next point, which is the difference in scientific culture and supervision styles. Now, we could go on about that forever, but we like to think that there's some productive frictions in the different expectations of faculty towards students, of students towards faculty across the Atlantic. But it has been one of our challenges to get the balance right.
And the same holds true for epistemological challenges that we have encountered, especially when it comes to the topic of diversity and living diversity, which is, considering the whole debate about, you followed that in the German context, cancel culture and left and right identity politics. political correctness, etc. pp. That is that is very much influencing the way that we can talk and discuss the issues at stake here in our context. And we see that North America and Europe are on different levels or different stages in really implementing let's say the goals or the things that political correctness asks you to do, and that also creates impediments for scholarly exchange on topics related to diversity. Legal mobility barriers
On top of this, I was going to say, on top of this sort of ideological, epistemological challenges, we have some very basic legal institutional problems at the level of immigration policy. Something that's happened over the last 10 years has been a growing restriction of movement, despite the discourse of mobility and globalization. It's increasingly difficult to move back and forth across the Atlantic. Unless you're going as a tourist, suddenly all kinds of barriers are coming up with work permits. German scholars have found themselves turned back at the border because they were suspected of coming to work, even though they were funded entirely from Germany. So there's going to have to be some important, and this is all of our university administrations are aware of these difficulties, and they're hitting up against walls with Immigration Canada that make it very difficult for scholarly exchange to proceed in the way it did for many decades before.
Yeah. And the last,
Then finally, if I could talk about another sort of technical issue that's caused problems, is the notion of a postdoc. Again, here this is a question of institutional culture. In Germany, a postdoc is really somebody who's more in the Mittelbau, who has more of a career perspective. In Canada, they're called postdoctoral students. So the status is different. The career perspectives are different. The duration of their mandates are different. We, with SSHRC, were able to fund postdoctoral students. The German monies didn't allow the funding of postdoctoral positions in Germany, but that's also largely due to this difference in status, which also sometimes led to confusion within our group about who was part of the faculty, who was a student, because of the sort of intermediary position of postdoctoral fellows and different definitions of them on the two sides of the Atlantic.
And to wrap up now, because we're very nicely, looking at the time thing, we'd like to put forward 5 recommendations. I think, first of all, and we think that first of all, it's really, if you'd like to continue this kind of thing, international research training groups between Canada and Germany in the humanities and social sciences, DFG and SSHRC need to harmonize the application and funding frameworks. We also think that DFG and SSHRC should think of including funding for regular workshops for faculty members to maximize synergies between different academic styles and institutional frameworks. So we have no funds that help us as faculty members to organize a meeting, a transatlantic meeting, or special workshops where we can come together. It's only we, accompany the doctoral researchers and doctoral students when they come together in their dissertation workshops. But I think, and we think it's really important to also offer funds for bringing the faculty members together. The 3-year doctoral program idea, or the myth as we have formulated it here, I think is already under debate. And I know at least that in the DFG it's critically discussed. We'd like to support this. We need to question the idea that a dissertation in the humanities and social sciences can be completed within 3 years. That brings us to the 4th point. looking at the BA, MA, and PhD structure, the three-tier structure of the Bologna system and the three-tier structure that we see in North America, I think we need to also discuss the question of where and how can we further harmonize the European and North American educational system. And last but not least, our plea is really to ensure, and that is more geared toward the universities and the disciplines, to ensure solid disciplinary training on the BA and MA level to really provide a basis for a following up dissertation in an interdisciplinary setting. Okay, that was it from our side. We'd like to thank you for your attention. We have talked too long, I know. I'm sorry for that, but you didn't intervene.
Absolutely not. That was excellent. Thank you to both of you. I am feeling equally inspired and daunted, I have to say. There were moments where I was like, this is amazing. This is the best thing ever. And then the challenges came. You've taken away most of my questions already, but perhaps some of the attendees here have questions or comments they'd like to offer. I see we have a colleague from the DFG offering the information that the DFG now provides funding for up to 48 months for PhD students in the research training groups. So a reflection perhaps of those debates that you were referring to. I'm interested, and perhaps you'll be interested to hear, yesterday we heard from Shirk, and your IRTG was mentioned there. And this was enlightening for me to understand the process, the pioneering work that you had to do to get the Shirk support. And I want to make sure that I understand, this is me asking from the Canadian perspective, you were, or this support was exceptional. It has been, or is this a path, I understand the challenges of it, is this a pathway that other Canadian applicants could still go down? Theoretically, it would require these dual applications and all of the work that's involved with creating that. But is that correct? That this is a pathway that's possible, but onerous?
Yeah. I think it is possible because Shirk, as far as I understood it, has now included this element of training into this broad, grant that brings together international partners. So this partnership grant application, which before that only focused on insight, this triple thing that Shirk has, and outreach, I think, and now we also have the talents included, and that was a prerequisite for us to then go the way and apply for DFG money, because without that, we wouldn't have been able to secure the matching grants from the Canadian side.
Very good. Thank you.
From my own recent experiences of being on the partnership selection committee this year, I've seen there's been certain changes that not only it used to be just insight, that is regular research was involved, now there's much more emphasis on both talent and connection, as well as research creation. So they've opened up the competition much more broadly, but in doing so have also added expectations of broader partnerships that include much more engagement from civil society groups, co-creation of knowledge. There's a lot of academic trends, I'll just call them that, not to make any judgment about them, that objectively make it more difficult to develop this kind of partnership. We were 3 institutions plus a foundation on the outside. That is already quite hard to juggle, in particular, since we're a program really concentrated on talent, that is on doctoral training. If we had to include more partners, the daunting elements that we expose now would become exponentially more daunting.
Fair enough. We have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll read. Ursula Lehmkuhl spoke of PhD tandems. Could you perhaps explain this more detail?
Yes, sure, I can do that. So when we started out with our first cohort, we had the idea that we'll mix up this group according to the most different principle, which meant when they first met at the Europäische Akademie in Otzenhausen, they were all put into like tandem, so to speak, who shared a room. And there was an anthropologist next to a linguist or whatever. We brought them together, and that was the idea, in order to really create a situation where everybody is trying to understand the disciplinary background of the other, and trying to think along the lines of the methods and theoretical approaches of other disciplines. The feedback of our students was very negative. They found that too challenging. So that is why in our second cohort, we established PhD tandems according to the most similar principle. That meant that we brought together a Canadian and German student working on a similar subject in a similar field, and they created a sort of, tandem that worked together over the period of 3 years. They had special duties during our intensive seminars, for example, in introducing short abstracts for the other student and the dissertation of the other student, or the input of the other student, as a sort of, again, hermeneutique croisée. You look at this work from the outside and try to present it to an audience. And then the author of the work had the possibility to respond and to see what has been understood and what not. And that, was a way to create a dialogic atmosphere from the very beginning, on a basis where the students really knew each other already. So to create a situation, a safe place, so to speak, where they knew each other, knew their work, and then could talk about it. That's what we've done.
Excellent. Thank you. Interesting. And that second approach was well received by the
Yes, that was better received. I should add, we also tried to establish a mechanism where the institutional knowledge of the first cohort and the second cohort was transferred, in that we, after the start of the second cohort in April, so all the cohorts start in April, we set up an inter-cohort meeting, a workshop, with the doctoral students from the first cohort and the second cohort, where they could match, they could exchange their anxieties or their experiences, and could, talk together. And that was also a quite successful strategy to connect the different cohorts.
My colleague from DAD Bonn asks, how many cohorts have there been in the life of the project?
So we have three
There's a total of three cohorts. We are now in the third cohort and entering into the third year of that cohort. So the cohort structure is a little bit difficult to understand, because a lot of people thought, this was a rolling program. But in fact, no, it's 3 blocks of 3 years.
So it's a 9-year.
Otherwise,
right.
It wouldn't
9
work,
years of funding, and you recruit every 3 years.
Right.
And this group stays together for 3 years. And that's why this qualification program works. Because if we had a rolling program, the qualification program would have to be structured completely differently.
Just for one of those institutional barriers, SSHRC's maximum funding is 7 years. So we managed to fund the first year with the Partnership Development Grant, kept our fingers crossed that we would get then the 7 years, and that would make 8 years. And then, fortunately, SSHRC, unlike DFG, allows you to roll money over the years. So we basically saved money for the final year, and that's how we got up to 9 to match the DFG side. So there you see how important it would be to have parallel structures, if not harmonized or joint structures.
So there's a follow-up question regarding the cohort structure. If I understand correctly, each cohort is essentially finished, and the principle is the students should be done within the 3 years, and then you move on to the next group. Although if I understand, extending that slightly in order to get them over the finish line is possible. Yes, no?
No, it's not possible. In our case, in the German case, the doctoral researcher have a 36-month contract. And that's it. That's the deal. And you've seen they need, on average, they needed 3 months more. And we did not have funding for these additional 3 months.
Okay.
That's a reality.
Right.
That's the same on our side. It's again more complicated because the students budget a total amount of stipend over 3 years, but we will not extend it beyond those 3 years, and there will not be a surplus of money at the end. This being said, we don't abandon them after 3 years and say, good luck and Godspeed. We do continue to accompany them. And for example, I'm still working with a student from our very first cohort who had 3 children during the time of the IRTG. So I think it's fair, and I think she'll finish with the 3rd cohort, and it'll be a great dissertation. But that's the exception.
That is a very important point. That is a very important point, Laurent, that of course the supervisors are going to continue to work with those students. And sometimes if we have, the creation of a family in between, we have these overlaps because of the parental leaves that students take. And that is all deduced from, these 36 months and then added to at the end of the parental leave, so that there is a certain overlap. But with regard to the qualification program so far, we actually had no cases where the parental leaves really conflicted with the structure of the qualification program. It somehow always worked out. And students participated in the intensive seminars very often with their young children, and a nanny, the grandmother or whoever, or the partner who accompanied them to Otzenhausen to take care of the children or of the child while she or he was doing work within our program.
Very good. We have time for one last question. We have 2.5 minutes starting now. Could you elaborate on your interdisciplinary challenges and how you worked on overcoming these, please? Good luck.
Yeah. Good luck. Well, the challenges are very clear. The situation is, especially, we have interdisciplinary mentoring teams, but especially we have these intensive seminars, 1 week meeting, where all the students have to present their dissertation in a plenum situation where all the faculty members and all the other students are present. And then we have parallel sessions with in-depth discussions of part of the dissertation. If you're sitting there with about 30 faculty members from all kinds of disciplines, and you present something, you will get a lot of advice and you will get a lot of ideas. And then students, take note of these ideas and this advice and are confused in the end. And then the mentoring team or the first supervisor is to take care of this confusion or this irritation. Sometimes it's a very productive irritation, but sometimes, that was our experience, this irritation also leads to, let's say, an inhibition of creativity or of working on in a particular disciplinary path, and of questioning yourself as a doctoral researcher. Where am I? Am I, really on the right track? And that is a situation where then, the supervisors and the mentoring team need to come together, and we have organized this very nicely now, that we have these regular meetings between the doctoral student and the mentoring team, where the first supervisor is going to play a very important role also in sort of managing the different advice and the different ideas that comes into play from different disciplinary backgrounds.
Excellent. Laurent, anything to add there before I wrap up?
Wow. No, that was great. I would just add, in some cases, some people are just going to be impervious to interdisciplinary advice, and in other cases, students will run after every rabbit, and so ideally, if we could find something between, so that the students do get some added value, but without getting distracted, and that's really the challenge. And as Ursula said, we've sort of tightened up the supervision teams and made sure that everybody's on the same page, so that the students are not running after too many rabbits, nor just getting narrow-minded about how they're going to do their work.
Excellent. Well, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I think we could go on for a while longer, but we can't. Thank you very much, Professor Lehmkuhl, Professor McFalls. That was excellent, very enlightening. I see that you have some contact information in your profiles on the system here, so if there are questions that are outstanding, people can feel free to reach out or reach out to us. I see in the chat, too, there is a link to the IRTG Diversity website, so for those of you interested, that will stay in there. Thanks again. For those of you who are attending, thank you for being here. We will move seamlessly on to the next session from the colleagues from the German Research Foundation, so please stay tuned. We'll take a minute to set things up. Once again, thank you, Professor Lehmkuhl, Professor McFalls. And
thank you.
Wonderful.